So Neil, what could communities like the Chinese community also learn from the experiences from the Muslim community in regards to resilience to these kind of crises and also discrimination?
Yeah, look, everything really starts with reaching out and having a conversation. Okay, so we social creatures at the end of the day, and we just by talking, okay, with one another, talking is a way of engaging, but at first, knowing who to reach out to, if again, it comes back to, wait a minute, we've been through this before. Let's not reinvent the wheel. These people, or whoever it was, remember, racism or discrimination has, happened to many other groups of people for decades, and it kind of like becomes, the next series in the next episode in the series becomes another group of people. Okay. There's a saying, if we don't learn from history, we are prone to always repeat it. And so let's say that a new community is in the spotlight. Let's say that it's their time on the stage. One of the things they could do is actually reach out to the previous communities and say, okay, what can we learn from you guys? And is there a way of working together? And also the communities that were on the receiving end in the previous episode need to also be proactive.
Yeah.
And don't wait to be reached out to. Actually offer yourself, reach out to them and say, look, I could sense that the agenda is developing. Like, currently you feel that the Chinese community agenda is being groomed. Okay, you could, like on Q&A the other night, you just know that it's the next group. Okay, all the signs are there. So let's say that the Muslim community were the previous group, for argument's sake. Okay, I mean, you have a responsibility, okay, to the next group, to a broader society, for you to be proactive and reach out and say, look, let's share some of our experiences to save your community from falling into similar traps. And by you having a better record, you could actually then save the next community. And
yeah.
And so it's a continuous thing where, there was an anti-racism campaign a few years ago, and the slogan was, racism stops with me. Okay, so if I was on the receiving end of whatever today, it should actually stop with me. Our attitude should be, okay, look, this has gone on for too long, okay, and all these other communities have experienced, similar things in the past, but I don't want to pass the buck on to someone else and let it become someone else's problem. So as a leader, leadership requires you doing the right thing, and the right thing is to try and nip it in the bud.
Yeah.
Like, say, it stops with me. Now, obviously, it's not going to stop, but what we can do is actually minimize the next one.
Yes.
And highlight those experiences, and it just keep popping up in my mind when I was talking to an Italian elder. And Italians were wogs until the 90s. They were not whites, they were wogs, and they had to name their children Frank instead of Franco because they were bullied horrendously. And that's why I keep saying to people, what do you think? Why is that big ass fence around the ethnic clubs are? It's to keep Australians out, because you couldn't speak your language on the street, you couldn't have an accent, you couldn't sing, you couldn't eat your food because you get horrendously bullied. The lunchbox experiences of a lot of the Eastern and Southern Europeans are so vivid in our elders' mind that they still tear up when they're talking about it. And when I'm talking to them, like, have you ever, did we just pass on the button to the next community to get abused with the exact same method of bullying their name, bullying their food? Why we never talk about this?
And because I work in the multicultural sector where there's a lot of organizations and groups, and they all have boards, and they all, different levels, and there is a split between European communities and African communities and Muslim communities and Asian communities, and sometimes they don't, and India, and there are geographies where they do work well together, and then there are geographies where it doesn't work well together. But this idea of remembering what you've gone through and not passing it on, I just think that's really why I was happy to talk today, because that's really the whole point, isn't it? It's like, I hate the word activist. I hate the word advocate sometimes, because I don't think of myself as either, really. I just think of myself as a citizen. I'm a citizen of Australia.
A responsible citizen.
A responsible citizen. And which means I don't think it's about sitting back and I'm not watering the lawn and pruning the tree before it falls over and crushes someone. We all have a job to do on the street, and we don't have to be given a title. And it concerns me that there's so many people who use that title and really what do they do? And people leave it to them to do everything. And that's one of the big problems we have. But I think that the situation now is we have so many multiple complex challenges that we can't do that anymore. I think, it's time to really, for communities to take more responsibility. And as Nail said, if you've gone through something, don't wait for permission before reaching out and saying, do you need help? I've gone through this. If you ever want me to come and speak at your club or your small, tiny kitchen table, I'll come and talk.
Yeah. And it's a really good example, Carl, in that if there was a question, how do we engage? If you're not being requested, okay, well, what you do is if you identify a particular forum, okay, a panel discussion, a conference or whatever, attend, okay, and even if you're not a panelist, at least in the Q&A section in the audience, raise your hand and make a contribution and be identified or recognized, to say, you know what, you actually have a lot to say. How about if we invite you to our next session? So make yourself available, be proactive, attend these people, because at the end of the day, it's a social space that we all share. We're part of a society here. We're part of what we say, we're all in the same boat, and you can't be selfish to say, look, you know what, I've been through a rough patch, and now it's your turn. And that's where the sincerity of multiculturalism in this country comes to how do you say, gets exposed, because whilst we're all celebrating multiculturalism, remember we love to celebrate our diversities, our foods, our dress codes, our entertainment. We're always celebrating multiculturalism, yet the sincerity of each other's commitments to one another is actually proven in times of crisis.
Yes.
And so this is where the true character of multiculturalism, or whatever we want to call it these days, okay, gets revealed, and again, it's a sign of a mature society, okay, and a mature community to actually step up, okay, and say, okay, you know what, maybe I could make a contribution, because at the end of the day, we don't live in a vacuum, because what impacts one particular group of people is going to reverberate, okay, onto other communities. We don't live in silos. And let's say, for example, and I only use this as an argument in point. Let's say that the Chinese community are the next community. Well, within the Chinese community are not one homogenous group, okay? Amongst them, there are Muslims, okay? There are Muslim Chinese. Amongst them, there are LGBT Chinese, okay? Amongst them, there are women Chinese, okay? Like, you understand where...
It's kind of, other people think, look, Asian, so they could be Chinese, but they're from any other country.
Well, I think it comes back to the whole intersectionality, where just because you may be of one particular ethnic group doesn't mean that you don't have other similarities. What about the young? I mean, there are young in every population. So, and again, it comes back to us seeing ourselves as part of a society. And unfortunately, if my part of my constructive criticisms of Australian society is that we still have that phenomenon of the other. Okay, now if you've been otherized, I'm not sure if that's if that's a correct term, but if you've been otherized, okay, in your previous experiences, and you see yourself as the other because you've been pigeonholed as the other, and all other communities see themselves as the other, we can't see ourselves as part of a collective. And that's where this is a sign of a mature society, where I see myself as part of another rather than just other. And I think that, if we learn from our experiences, that will add to the strength of our maturity moving forward. I know this sounds like a marketing pitch, but
no,
I'm sold.
I agree with you. And it's that kind of going out and just doing it, that no matter how small and how simple, and doing it before the crisis hits.
Yeah.
You know why? Because, and I've given closed evidence about this to people and government, it's the informal influencers and networks, the informal ones that, authorities think that they know the informal, but they don't. They really just deal with elected leaders, which isn't really the people that families necessarily connect with and listen to. So when we say go out and sit at someone's kitchen table, doesn't matter how small it is, but if you are consistent, you're developing an informal network. Now, as soon as a tragic, horrible incident happens and we end up spiraling and everyone loses that sense of control and fear is very high, what I can tell you from experience, what holds it together, what gives advice to government and law enforcement when they're losing the plot, is this informal network, trusted informal people crossing bridges of differences because they just kind of meet at the same coffee shop, or they both like golf, or they both hate their wife's cooking, or whatever it is. They kind of form these little informal social networks. Now, during an emergency, we really depend on them, and they actually become more important than the official network. So what Nell is saying is absolutely correct. Yeah. And
we had that conversation as well with you, Carl, in regards to women. There's a lot of elected officials in our communities that are men and, a lot patriarchal, and but generally they have more capacity, understanding of finances. So there's all of sort of, different reasons why. Like, I was the first female president of the Hungarian Association, and they've been
okay.
For 7 years.
I remember that conversation now.
Yes, but we never had that. How about women? And we recently also started having that conversation about bilingual families, because we have a translation interpreter shortage. Yes, we have so many bilingual moms who literally act as a connections between their families and communities, but no policy actually talk about them. How to reach those women as well.
I've had this conversation for quite a while now, and it's so true. We don't realize how important women are, and even traditional women in traditional societies and communities. So they are the ones who are, from a social services point of view, and from a social cohesion and law enforcement point of view, and a political point of view, they're really seen as the lowest down, so they don't even appeal to mainstream women who work in government and community peak services, who are delivering families, because they feel that, oh, you're too traditional, you don't understand the modern, you don't know how to empower yourself. So we tend not to recognize that the power those traditional women have in their families and in their societies, even if they're not elected. And also the access they have, they can access through their role as mother. The mother is very powerful. Yeah. The mother can access places that not even probably ASIO can get to, or AFP, or your local law. They can get to and know and influence and control. So you got to remember, when you have a disengaged young person that perhaps is being observed rightly or wrongly, and is legitimately, you know, someone that the community wants to bring back in the fold. So you got to remember that someone who sounds rather aggressive and tough, still having his laundry done, and someone bringing his dinner over because he can't do either the cooking or his laundry. So the kind of, you know, I don't know, that's one half of it. The other half of it, of course, is that when you look at the technical number, head counting of ethnic communities, most of the elected representatives are men. So a lot of these communities are getting funding from state and federal governments with arguments based on empowering women and families and young people. And yet it's women and young people that don't have access to the funds and don't get brought in to learn how to manage the funding and strengthen their capacity to get involved, improve the numbers and work and respect as board members in community as well, and decision makers. So yeah, I think they are the great, especially mothers, traditional mothers, very unidentified, very powerful group in our community that is really, in an emergency, I have seen them bring together networks that really nobody else could.